If your compost heap is stubbornly sitting at room temperature while you're itching for rich, ready-to-use humus, I've got one standout trick that will ignite it into action, and it doesn't involve special machines or exotic inputs. Fellow gardeners, as your master gardener guide, I'm going to walk you through how a high nitrogen additive can turn a cold compost pile into a warm, active one, naturally, efficiently, and with minimal fuss. Why cold compost happens and why it matters. Your compost pile is essentially a microbial factory. Microbes break down organic matter, releasing heat in the process. When conditions aren't ideal, too little nitrogen, too much dry carbon, insufficient moisture or air, the activity stalls, and it becomes a cold pile. That means it takes months, even a year or more, to decompose. Experts explain that the critical factors are size, moisture, about the consistency of a wrung-out sponge, aeration, and the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If your pile fails to heat up, you also miss out on the hot compost benefits, faster turnaround, better pathogen and weed seed kill-off, and more nutrient-rich humus. The additive, high nitrogen material that ignites the pile. So here's the golden trick. Adding a nitrogen-rich activator to your pile gives microbes the fuel they need to multiply rapidly, which in turn generates heat. A standout example is using fresh grass clippings, but even more effective and less bulky is an additive like urine, which has a strong nitrogen value and has been shown to fire up a cold compost quickly. Additives of this type move the pile from passive or cold composting toward active, warmer decomposition. So, how much should you use and, well, how do you actually apply it? Here's how you use it. Treat the pile as usual. With a decent size, that's a minimum of about 1 cubic meter or 3 by 3 by 3 feet, so it retains heat and microbial mass. And when you notice it's sluggish, go ahead and apply the nitrogen additive. Now for urine you can pour it directly, but make sure to dilute it first to avoid burning the material or causing odor issues. A good rule of thumb is 1 part urine to 10 parts water. So, for example, 1 liter of urine in 10 liters of water, applied evenly across the pile as you mix in new or existing material. This gives you a strong nitrogen boost without overdoing salts or ammonia. If you're using grass clippings instead, just apply a layer of fresh clippings in a 2-to-1 carbon to clipping ratio. That's 2 parts carbon browns for each part green grass, to keep things balanced. Where does this additive fit into your compost strategy? Well, you don't rely on it alone. Think of the additive as a jump starter. First, you want to make sure you have a well-constructed compost pile, enough mass, a good mix of greens and browns, the right amount of moisture, and plenty of aeration. Then, when your pile is cold, that is, there's no sign of heat and the breakdown seems sluggish, you introduce the additive. The nitrogen surge revs up microbial activity, which in turn raises the internal temperature. From there, you maintain the pile by turning it or managing aeration, keeping the moisture just right and letting the heat do its work. This lines up with what compost accelerator guides say. Fixing a slow pile is usually as simple as adding more nitrogen-rich materials to the pit. Here's a step-by-step for master gardeners. Start by assessing your pile. Is the temperature flat? Is decomposition minimal? If so, it's time to step in. First, mix in or layer new material so the pile stays sizable and shaped for heat retention. Second, apply your additive. If you're using urine, dilute it 1 to 10 and sprinkle or pour it over as you turn or build the pile. If you're using grass clippings, mix in freshly cut clippings so they're spread out, not clumped, and make sure to add browns along with them. Third, lightly turn the pile, especially if you're aiming for more active or hot composting, to reoxygenate the material. Fourth, monitor moisture. Aim for that damp sponge feel, too dry and the microbes slow down, too soggy, and oxygen drops. Fifth, watch for heat. You might see a temperature rise, steam on a cool morning, or a faster breakdown of materials. From here, just keep up the rhythm, turn occasionally, feed with extra greens or browns as needed and keep the environment steady. Why this works, and why it matters. Nitrogen is basically the protein for microorganisms. When you add nitrogen, you're giving microbes the building blocks they need to reproduce and metabolize faster. That means you get increased biological activity, which leads to heat. Without enough nitrogen, you might have tons of carbon, think dry leaves or woody material, but you'll see a slow microbial response, so the pile just sits there cold. The additive, in this case, really helps correct that imbalance. For you, as a master gardener, the benefit is significant. You get compost ready faster, which means you can feed your garden sooner, begin reuse, and keep your cycle efficient. Let's talk about some considerations and cautions. While this additive is quite potent, it still needs to be used within a balanced system. Too much nitrogen without enough carbon can lead to odor, anaerobic conditions, or even a soggy pile. If you're using urine, make sure you're healthy and free of medications or conditions that might introduce unwanted pathogens, though, honestly, many sources do regard healthy human urine as safe for compost activators. Also, if you're working with a small pile or if the pile's undersized, even the additive won't automatically bring heat. It still has to meet the physical criteria of volume and insulation. Here's the bottom line: if you're faced with a cold compost pile and want action, don't overcomplicate it. Just add a well-diluted nitrogen blast, urine at a 1 to 10 dilution, or some fresh grass clippings to a well-built and moist pile, stir it up, keep it aerated, and watch the temperature climb. Honestly, this is one of the most actionable, inexpensive steps you can take to move a static pile into active, heat-generating decomposition. That's real power for your garden cycle, and as master gardeners we love tools like this: simple, effective, and high value.